Hi, this is Mike Cooper, Vice Chair of the Grays Harbor County Democrats. And tonight we have the second installment in our Meet the Candidates feature. We're going to be interviewing our endorsed Democratic candidate for State Treasurer, State Representative Mike Pellicciotti. Mike, tell us about yourself and why we should vote for you.
Sure. Well, thanks, Mike. Thanks for having me. It's great to connect with the Grays Harbor Democrats. Right before everything started changing a few months ago, I was able to get around the state, and I visited 19 different counties, and Grays Harbor is one of the first ones I wanted to connect with. So I was happy to speak to some folks out there maybe about 8 or 9 months ago, but it's great to connect with folks through the organization now. I guess I'll start with, the fact that, when I first ran for office in 2016, I first ran for the House of Representatives. So I was running against a Republican incumbent, and we were trying to do things differently. And I did that by not accepting any corporate donations. And that's something I've continued to do. And I've been one of the only state elected officials who's always said no to all corporate donations. And there is no position in my mind where it is more critical to not have corporate campaign entanglements than the position of state treasurer that invests over $100 billion of your money. You need a treasurer who's going in there with clean hands and making decisions for what's always best for working families and retired folks. And, in the legislature, it's allowed for me to lead on a lot of important financial issues, especially related to financial transparency. I passed my laws to get dark money out of Washington state politics, passed my bill to have political action committee transparency so that you can't just use friendly sounding PAC names and hide from voters who the real donors are related to campaigns. So I was able to get that passed into law last year. And the bill I've worked on with Senator Solomon to get foreign corporate donations out of Washington politics. And that was a bill that we passed this last session, because fundamentally so many of these issues, that and issues around public records, where I was the first legislator to voluntarily provide all of my public records, while calling on the legislature to provide all of their public records as well. And we've changed the practice related to that transparency as well. So many of these issues of financial transparency, how money's used, needs to always be in the best interest of working families and retired people. And it's time to have someone with clean hands doing that. And I'm going to show up. I'm running against an incumbent that you might remember 4 years ago. There were 5 candidates for this, 3 Democrats and 2 Republicans. The 3 Democrats split the vote. And even though the 2 Republicans had less than 50% in the primary, they were the 2 who went on to the general election. So we kind of got an accidental treasurer, and he's one, sports, has supported Donald Trump. And I think it's kind of out of step with where our state is on things. And so, I'm really excited about, moving forward and making sure that we best fight for working families and retired folks at all opportunities.
Great. So on campaign contributions, since you touched on corporate donations, and that's admirable, State Treasurer has some responsibility for participating in the investment of pension funds, and I noticed that you are endorsed by some public employee unions. How does that play in the debate about contributions and your responsibility there? How do you respond to Republicans who say, well, you're taking all this big labor money and you're investing their pension funds?
Sure. No, it's a great question. So, I'll start off by saying, I am a member of the Washington Federation of State Employees. When I haven't been in the legislature, I've managed efforts to take on financial fraud in our state, managed a unit of financial examiners, auditors, and analysts that returned over $30 million back to taxpayers. So I'm proud of my work as a state employee, and as the son of educators, I know how important pensions are to folks. I'm also proud that a lot of labor organizations that had previously endorsed my opponent in 2016 flipped their endorsement and are endorsing me this year. State Labor Council, the Washington Education Association, right? I'm proud to also be endorsed by the Washington State Nurses Association, who hadn't previously endorsed in this race in years past. And it's because they know I'm going to continue to fight for what's always in the best interest of working families and retired folks. But one of the things and I'm glad you brought up the State Investment Board. It's a critical role. It's the job of the treasurers to make sure we're maximizing our returns in a thoughtful, appropriate way. That's why a lot of those groups care about that, because when we're doing what we need to do to raise the money through the State Investment Board, we're not taking money out of the operating budget, right? Because if you're not investing appropriately in the state investment board, you're going to be dipping into the operating budget where that money needs to be going for other important things in our state. But, when I was talking about showing up earlier, this is, I think, a critical component. My opponent has only attended 3 of the last 18 personally attended. He's only personally attended 3 of the last 18 state investment board meetings since the fall of 2017. Right. This is the board that's making these critical decisions, watching out for working families and retired folks. And he hasn't been personally showing up, and that's not okay. I mean, his predecessor chaired the board. It took 30% of his job as treasurer. So I'm going to continue to fight for those issues.
Great, thank you. And as a recipient of those pension funds, I thank you for that answer. Well, so the responsibilities of the state treasurer, I believe, says something about your responsibility is to manage the investments, cash, and debts of the state. And with, I think, capital budget is bonded, 60 or 70% of the capital budget is bonds. What kind of decisions go into managing that debt? How would you do it differently than the incumbent?
Sure. Well, I'll start by saying, we have a long history in our state of having a treasurer's office that is nonpartisan in a lot of those day-to-day operations, and that should not change. The folks who were there doing good work during all the previous Democratic administrations that are there now need to stay there and continue to do the good work they're doing in terms of the cash flow and a lot of those issues. Obviously, issues of managing the debt are always important, and we need to be responsible and prudent in how we deal with that. One thing the legislature has done well lately is we've actually listened to groups like Moody's and other bond rating companies as to what we need to do. And part of that was making sure we took care of McCleary and found a reliable way of taking care of that funding and taking care of that constitutional issue. Now that we've done that, our bond rating has gone up. I think there's more that we can do with that. We should be advising the public appropriately before they do initiatives, for example, as to the impact an initiative might have on our bond rating and the debt load or our ability to pay our debts. Fundamentally, we need to balance our books. That's something I'm committed to as I've been in the legislature voting for a balanced budget every year. But you also need a treasurer who's independent. I mean, while I do believe I have values, I have Washington values more than my opponent does. I think ultimately you just need to have someone who's independent, who's willing to stand up to the legislature when they're not doing something right. And that's what I've done related to public records. I mean, I stood alone related to that and really changed the course of how our public records are now provided. I mean, that was a very lonely place to be when I was standing alone and fighting for that, but it was the right thing to do. It's what I've been able to do with a lot of these bills taking on dark money and the way money comes into our political system. That's something that has not been it's not just kind of Republican corporate money that's a problem with that. That's something that's been an issue throughout the entire system. And that, in cleaning it up, it ultimately helps working families and retired folks. I believe that. I guess what I would just say is, I'm going to do everything that's responsible and prudent, make sure we're balancing our books, make sure we're relying on the nonpartisan aspect of our office to do that right. But what I also point out is we have not had a Republican elected state treasurer against a Democrat, where a Republican has actually beaten a Democrat since it's happened only once in the last 90 years. That was in 1952.
You're right.
That's because we've done a pretty good job in Washington of managing those funds. And I want to make sure we keep doing that right.
Thank you. As I recall, the longest serving state treasurer in the state's history was a Democrat.
It's probably right. It's probably Robert O'Brien.
Robert O'Brien, 30 or 40 years or something.
Yeah, well, in about 100 years, until about maybe even less than that, it was probably about 75 years ago, the treasurer was actually limited to one term.
Right.
And so that was a big contributing factor of that. But no, look, I mean, we've done a good job as Democrats leading this office, and I look forward to continuing that leadership.
Okay. If you don't mind, there's been a lot of discussion about public banking over the last several years. I was in the legislature in the 90s, and we talked about public banks. The current treasurer has come out opposed to the notion of public banks. Do you have any thoughts about that, or how the state might approach that?
Sure. Well, it's one of the things the legislature, has been actually looking into. They put together something the majority legislature voted for, in the last couple cycles to put together a business plan to see what is viable in terms of infrastructure banking. Something that in no way would risk pension dollars in any way, risk state dollars. The question is whether or not there's sufficient demand by municipalities to pool funds to collateralize an effort to allow for infrastructure investment. That's something that is appropriate to be examining. But I think that one of the things that the current treasurer has taken a position on is that that review should not even be done. He's at every step of the way has said that there should not even be a assessment of that, and he's done whatever he can at every step of the way to thwart that. I think when we're talking about infrastructure investment in communities, we have to always be looking at all viable options to do that, but we have to do it in a responsible, prudent way, and at least having it looked at is always, I think, a good way to do that by people who are smarter than I think than others might be in terms of really analyzing it in a way that might be in the best interest of folks. But what I'll also say is it's one of the advantages of not taking any corporate money, right? I mean, I'm running against an opponent who has been funded by the big banks, and I think it really makes him not the best messenger as to why this should not even be looked at when he's taking money from those who are benefiting from this.
Okay. When I've been out and about, even during the 2016 election, a lot of conversation about the current treasurer and he's not doing a bad job. What's wrong with the job he's doing? And so, how do you respond to folks who, quite frankly, Democrats and even independent voters who say, well, what's wrong with the job the guy's doing there? Why should they elect you talk a lot about yourself, but why should they elect a Democrat and replace the guy who's there, who's not necessarily, at least in the eyes of the rank and file voter, doing a bad job? What is it that needs a change?
Sure. Well, I guess I'll start with a couple different things. One is going back to the heart of making sure we're doing everything we can to help working families and retired folks. One of the bills I introduced last session was to move the unclaimed property money in the state treasury. It's over $1 billion into the treasurer's office so that the treasurer can be promoting that better. Right now, 1 in 7 Washingtonians have unclaimed money that they don't know about, over $1 billion, right? 1 in 2 have a family member related to that. When someone's, and for those who might not be familiar with that, what that is if you have, let's say you moved houses or apartments, and when you do that, you didn't get your utility payment, your utility deposit. Well, that money that goes back to the utility company, that doesn't belong to the utility company, it belongs to you, right? It's your deposit. And so they have to give it to the state of Washington, for example. And that applies to all types of things that corporations might get. They have to give it to the state. The state holds it in trust. It's really an opportunity, I think, to make sure we get that money back to the people, and we need to prioritize that. What I will say in a larger context is we have a treasurer who is only personally attending 3 of the last 18 state investment board meetings. That's not okay. I mean, we're dealing with major, complicated legal financial issues right now. This is not kind of the 19th century way of doing a treasurer's office. I mean, we hear about this from people like Congresswoman Porter or Senator Warren or others who recognize these legal financial issues and how these laws are written matter a lot. And the treasurer's office gives a lot of say related to legislation that affects the banking industry, that affects things like credit unions, a lot of the access to capital that might apply to people, small business grants, who would have access to those things. And then also the efforts that we can be doing in terms of our the ownership share that we have in certain companies to make sure that we're advocating for things that are really in the long-term interest of companies, or because we have a long-term investment in those companies, not just the short-term profits. And that's something that the current treasurer has remained completely silent on. And this is one of those positions where you're talking about a position where you need to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. I mean, the basic foundational things related to the office need to maintain. We will continue to do that. But these issues are far more complicated than just those kind of core issues. I mean, we're dealing with major legislative issues, major constitutional issues, major legal issues that really affect whether folks are getting a fair shake at all related to the way our finances and our economy works. And we're seeing that time and time again in the way laws are written. And if we don't understand that impact and really are advocating in a way to make sure that we're operating in the best interest of all Washingtonians and how our economy works, that's a problem. And I do think the values matter related to a position like that.
Great, thank you. One final opportunity here for you to do a commercial. If people want to get involved in your campaign, how can they get a hold of you, and how can people out here in Grays Harbor get involved in Mike Pellicciotti's campaign for state treasurer?
Great. Well, thanks, Mike, and thanks obviously for the chance to connect with you on this, and thank you for your past service to the state as well, and obviously your continued service to our party. Best way to reach me is electmikep.com. Electmikep.com is my website. My personal email is mike@electmikep.com. That's a great way to get a hold of me. Again, running a campaign with no corporate money, requires relying on a lot of small donations and support from people. And before the pandemic and before the last legislative session, I was taking this campaign on the road. I mean, like I said, I visited 19 of our 39 counties before the start of this year. And it's been great. I mean, when I've been going around, I hear from people, but I hear kind of consistent messaging that we want to make sure that our economy works for everyone in a way that that is free from corporate entanglements, and that folks are making a decision that's always in the best interest of working families and retired people. And that's what I'm looking forward to doing as treasurer.
Great. Well, as soon as Grays Harbor County gets into phase 3, which I hope is in the next week or so, as soon as the governor's office approves it, we'll be making plans to reopen our office in Aberdeen. So certainly by mid-July or by the time of the primary rolls around, we'll have an office open. The endorsed candidates will have an opportunity to bring their yard signs, leave them at our office so folks can pick them up. Use our office for phone banking as social distancing allows. So we look forward to seeing you out here again. And unfortunately, no fair this year, or we'd invite you to come and sell hamburgers at our booth. But we're looking forward to seeing you again as the election progresses and we start meeting in person again out in Aberdeen. So thank you for running, and looking forward to seeing more of you and in Grays Harbor, and hopefully a victory in November.
You bet. Thanks for all you're doing, Mike, and thanks to all my friends with Grays Harbor Democrats. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.